It is a truth universally acknowledged that a franchise in possession of a good fan base must be in want of a published knitting anthology. Good day, friends. I would absolutely love a Venn diagram of the special interests my viewers enjoy, because when I say I'm going to talk about my favorite fandom knits, I'd love to know who's excited to find another living soul who's knit multiple Doctor Who scarves. I'd also love to know who's screaming at their screen wanting to throttle me for including fandom-inspired knits, because that's a thing too. Finally, I'd just love to know how many of you are genuinely surprised that knitters get nerdy about their fandoms to the point where they'd sacrifice the better part of 3 months and half their yarn budget to a scarf that by all accounts grew and shrank depending on what use and season of Doctor Who the Fourth Doctor was living through at the time. I bet I have some knitting viewers who can't watch Doctor Who without needing a stiff drink and a hug, because that's valid. Post-scarf PTSD is totally a thing. Comment down below with your experiences, because I'd really like to know if I'm alone in this foolish knitting nerdery. So there we go. That's the show. The Doctor Who scarf is really longer than it needs to be, and I'm just flexing on all of you with my mad knitting skills and displays of affection for my equally geeky family. Catch you next time. I mean, obviously, that's not the entire show, because we'd be missing out on a whole metric schwack of knitted items that I'm sure would make about a third of you swoon, and another third of you start knitting to produce, and the final third is just going to roll your eyes and mutter that she's talking about knitting again, and that's fine. You go rewatch that last corset video. I'll catch up with you when I'm sewing the rest of my Edwardian underwear. Inconveniently not on Valentine's weekend, because apparently I can't plan my way out of a wet paper bag. Besides, it could take a while. The basement is still in disarray, and I'm trying to avoid taking over the kitchen again. Last thing we need in the household turf war is a battle for the special interests in our kitchen, because while I have plenty of pointy objects, the husbeast has Lego, and that stuff is lethal. There are moms of a certain age with oddly shaped bruises on their feet who are currently tipping their wine glasses in my direction, and ladies, I salute you. When it comes to fandom makes, because I'm possibly going to nerd out a teensy bit of field of knitting, I'm heavily biased. I've designed knitted fandom-inspired garments. In fact, they make up the bulk of my designs. Some would call that derivative. I call it inspiration. As I've alluded, there are different kinds of fan knits. Or maybe it's more appropriate to say fan makes, because they run anywhere from a knitted equivalent of fan art, like my own Weeping Angel socks, which are inspired by the Stone Angels of Doctor Who, but aren't actually worn by anyone in the show, to prop recreations such as movie-perfect facsimiles complete with movie-perfect rips and tears of the Chris Evans Knives Out sweater that I'm sure Adam Savage would approve. And then you have pure homage, fibers, yarns, and tools that are named for particularly fun fan in-jokes. There's a tidy industry built up around some of these crafty designs and items. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a franchise in possession of a good fan base must be in want of a published knitting anthology. Hence, you have Harry Potter Knitting Magic, the official Harry Potter knitting pattern book. Yes, that's the full title. It contains the requisite house scarves and Weasley sweater patterns, as well as many other knits inspired by the books and or movies. So you too may have your very own Cornish pixie doll or vibrant knit gloves inspired by Luna Lovegood's Spectre Specs. On the other hand, you also have the unofficial Harry Potter Knits magazine, brought to you by the same folks who edited the popular Jane Austen Knits special magazines, which apparently Interweave Press either split off or sold part of their IP, because I'm now seeing the main Interweave stable of magazines under one name and Piecework and Spinoff under an entirely different name. I may have to dig into that for a future episode. At any rate, the unofficial book boasts neither a Weasley sweater nor a traditional house scarf, but there's the rather attractive Ginny's cardigan and a pair of mittens that are magnifique. I know they're awesome because I knit them for my mom one year for Yule. I used Knit Picks palette and put in a liner so they're super warm. My mom's a Harry Potter fan. However, if our conversation at the Costco the other day is any indication, Ms. Rowling has slipped in Mom's esteem. Take that as you will. This is my way of saying that Ms. Rowling has disappointed my mom, and I try very hard not to disappoint Mom. Historically speaking, that's a one-way ticket to losing both your allowance and your late curfew privileges. Not that I've been affected by either very much in the past 30 years, but it's the principle of the thing. Harry Potter isn't the only franchise to cash in on the whole craft scene. A quick check of Amazon netted me Crochet Star Wars by Lucy Collin, aka Lucy Ravenscar. If you're looking for an amigurumi Grogu, you're in luck. The book features an amigurumi Yoda on the cover. You just need to get creative. And Lucy Collin is quite prolific and very much into the fan-based amigurumi scene. If that's your bag, then you will, no doubt, enjoy the wide selection of amigurumi figures in her Ravelry store, including multiple versions of Game of Thrones characters, Totoro, various dragons and gnomes, and even wee Firefly characters. Hopefully nobody has anything against Nathan Fillion, because that's a voodoo doll just waiting to happen. There's also Geek Knits by Joan of Dark. The author has very carefully phrased the titles of her patterns to elude the copyright vultures, so I think we can safely say that one's not a licensed product. That said, if you ever had the urge to knit a fez, or a Star Trek scant dress, or a scarf and hat as modeled by Neil Gaiman, you may just find that Geek Knits has what you're looking for. I do believe the scarf and possibly the hat that Neil's wearing were also featured in Knitty, just further proof that Knitty has good taste. Once we get around the whole pesky property licensing nonsense, we're thrust into the wonderful world of fan knits. I was positive I'd seen a book or a magazine devoted to the knits from The Hobbit, but I appear to have been mistaken. There are, however, a bunch of patterns inspired by Tolkien's Middle-earth stories. Considering how long The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit have been fan favorites among readers, it's not surprising that knitters would feel similarly. A quick Ravelry search will net you multiple knit dwarven helmets and knit gauntlet arm warmers. There are dragon scale inspired shawls and socks, and even felted hobbit shoes. Probably the most iconic Middle-earth knits are the Brandywine shawl by Romy Hill and the Even Star shawl by Susan Pandorf. Both are classics amongst knitters, either for their simple and elegant motif, the Brandywine shawl, or for their complexity, the Even Star. Some knitters consider the Even Star to be their peak shawl experience, purchasing yarn and beads far in advance of making the actual garment. I may be one of them. The Brandywine shawl was a fun knit and was a great excuse to use up some fabulous pink yarn that was just a wee bit too thin for socks. The Even Star, I'm still working up to it. I have a bead spinner and everything. Definitely not a project I'm going to try busting out in 2 weeks for a video. That would be ridiculous. And if I ever sound like I'm even thinking of doing such an absurd thing, I'd like one of my loyal viewers to please send me a sternly worded reminder in the comments so I don't get too far ahead of myself. Future Mayor thanks you. Also, proving that the author isn't the only controversial part of the Potterverse, we have a trio of socks that made a huge splash in the early days of Ravelry. The socks, Bellatrix, Fox, and Nagini, were released in July 2007 under the designer names of Monkey Toes and/or Socktopia. Ravelry was still in its early heyday and folks were still finding their personal tribes. There were a handful of boards on the forums devoted to sock knitting, and Socktopia was one of them. I'm not going to get into the whole drama in this episode, but suffice to say, the patterns that were free to download on Ravelry still appear to be there, and still appear to be popular. I remember most folks loved the Bellatrix pattern, whereas my favorites were the Fox. I think I made those up in some koi goo, somewhat similar to a monkey by Cookie A now that I think about it. As already discussed under licensed and just barely unlicensed knitting, Harry Potter is exceptionally popular. In the category of possible prop making, Hermione Hart's Ron by Christy Aylesworth and Hermione's Cable and Eyelet Hat by Jackie Lauzang are right up there as interpretations of a toque or beanie as worn by Hermione in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. I remember watching The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, and found it interesting that in some shots, Gandalf was wearing what appeared to be fingerless mittens mittens and in other shots arm warmers. So I wrote up a quick flexible pattern and wizard warmers were created. The husband seemed to like the pair I made him, and there's a mare-sized pair out of thin hand spun somewhere around here. I know I only touched on the tip of the iceberg here. There are so many more fandoms and knits to explore, from cable knit sweaters appearing on The Mandalorian to various knits from the Outlander series and even Nanny McPhee. I didn't even mention the infamous Jane Cobb hat, which is supposed to look poorly knit. A difficult feat if you're a practiced knitter. Mine is still in its component parts. As for non-knitting or crochet-inspired items, keep an eye out for fiber with a nerdy theme. I had a subscription to an Into the World fiber club for a while, and Chris, the owner/dyer, really loves pop culture. She'd often take a still from a TV show or a movie and boil it down to 3 or 4 dominant colors in a frame. As a result, I have bags of fiber with names like Godswood, Madame Vastra, Scissors Lizard Spock, and Captain Tight Pants. I may have bought a double order of that last one when it was available because, well, obvious reasons. Into the World isn't the only fiber dyer who enjoys pop culture. A few years ago, 2015 if I'm not mistaken, some dyers on Ravelry decided to pay homage to the late Terry Pratchett. I was really fortunate to pick up some Vetinari and Nobby, named after the characters from Pratchett's Discworld series. Vetinari spun up really nice and fine, and at some point I planned to make the husbeast a scarf or a neck warmer. Finally, one for you hand sewers. Ever wanted something to convince your friends you're a total historic sewing nerd? Maybe you low-key want to buy you a tapestry of your very own? And maybe you're a fan of Die Hard. Yep, you can totally get cross-stitch patterns on Etsy that evoke the Bayeux tapestry but are rooted in recent pop culture references. I mean, according to Amazon, you can also get cross-stitch inspired by the actual Bayeux tapestry, but who does not want their very own medieval Hans Gruber falling from Nakatomi Palace? Though I'm partial to Yeet the Rich, in which a body is flung from a trebuchet. I may have a bit of linen Ida cloth saved back in hopes I can afford the collection of medieval memes for my very own Bayeux knockoff, for I am sorely afflicted with the plague, and the only salve is more cowbell. If you want to help me attain this lofty goal, which I admit seems rather pretentious up until the point where you realize what it is you're looking at, please do me a favor and like this video, possibly subscribe if you haven't already. I am always happy to read your comments, even though my ability to keep up with the replies has seriously suffered over the last month or so. A couple of crafty folks managed to track down my Patreon account, and while I didn't think anyone could do anything with it, they proved me wrong. I'm thankful for the unexpected tips, Nancy and Margaret. If I don't already have a couple of low tiers up and running by the time this video goes live, they'll be included shortly afterwards and available via my usual link to all my socials and sites. Some of my costubing peers use Ko-fi, but I'd rather reduce the amount of accounts I have to keep track of. If all goes well, I should have a working sewing and office space soon, which means we'll be getting back to some actual sewing content, because I really want to get my corset alterations done soonish so I can start adding all the other layers to this Edwardian fiasco. Till then.